Yo, what's up everybody? My name is Peter, and together with my wife Yen, we were able to retire at the age of 33 and make travel and food videos from around the world. And a lot of you guys have been asking us what has been in our portfolios to be able to live this kind of lifestyle, and I'm going to share that with all of you today. Now, before I begin the video, there is just one thing I do want to clarify. I am not a certified professional financial advisor. If you do look for financial advice, please see a professional. This video is only for entertainment purposes only. So with that being said, let's get into the video. Now, before I go into the details of our portfolio, there is just a couple of principles that I wanted to share with you guys that kind of explains a lot of the investment decisions that Yen and I have made over the years. And the first one of those is we have extremely low risk tolerance. So anything that's like, you guys have probably heard of them, anything that's kind of like, put in this amount of money to 10x your money in a couple of days, we will typically avoid because it seems like too much of a gamble for us. We will instead opt for value investing, where you put in a certain amount of your wealth after you've done a lot of due diligence and research so that you can get slow and steady returns over time while generating that passive income. That ticks all the right boxes for Yen and myself. And the other core principle that we like to follow, and this one is extremely hard, no matter how many times you hear it, it sounds simple, but it's in practice very difficult to do, which is buy low, sell high. And typically we will not want to sell the stocks or the assets that we own at all, but if they ever reach a point where they're too high and it's overly inflated, then it's something that you might want to consider that you need to exit out of. So we're going to go over our portfolio now at different stages of our lives, starting with the early stages. After graduating from university in our early 20s, Yen and myself got our first jobs. I worked at a call center in an insurance company, and Yen worked at an online shopping portal. And thanks to our parents, we were able to stay at home for a little bit of extra time, which allowed us to save enough for our first deposit. And remembering the principles that we covered a little bit earlier on, buying low and selling high. So the first property that we purchased was at the time extremely low in terms of price. Landed properties were already quite expensive, but apartments were very unloved, but they all had the benefits of being very close to the work areas so that you could actually save even more on transportation. So we managed to save 40% for a deposit on our first home, which was quite a lot. It allowed us to build momentum in our savings even more by saving more money because we had less mortgage to pay. And so as we were working during our first years, whatever bonuses that we got, whatever pay rises that we got for promotions, we would put all that additional income into the property. We would barely ever celebrate those kind of big windfalls. All that money would go back into our property portfolio, which was just that one single property that we lived in. And of course, it's low risk because we did our due diligence. There are a lot of properties in New Zealand that do unfortunately have water leaking issues. We spent a year researching property, especially in the apartment market, just to make sure that the property that we did purchase as our first one was A-OK. And so that portfolio was 100% property, and a reasoning for that was, and the reasoning for paying so much of it so quickly off was that no matter what happened in our careers, we would at least have a home for us to live in, and so we would have that kind of security. We didn't want to risk putting our money into anything else that might distract us from that main goal. Now, because Yen and I were able to save such a big deposit on our first property, and also because we managed to purchase it at quite a low price because no one wanted to live in apartments, and on top of that, with all the additional savings that we were getting through bonuses and pay rises and things like that, we were able to pay off our first property very quickly. By the time we reached our mid-20s, it was almost 100% debt-free. And also around about the same time, the GFC happened. Now that saw a massive bottoming out on terms of asset prices all around the world. So you saw a lot of properties drop 10-20%. You saw a lot of shares drop in terms of value as well. And we saw this as the prime opportunity to pick up another investment property, because at the same time, we didn't have any cash flow to be able to spend on anything, but we were able to use the equity in our first home to purchase another property. And it was relatively low risk for us because the yield on that second property that we purchased was able to cover the interest payments plus some. So it was safe for us. Once again, we also did a huge amount of research because we didn't want to be stuck with a lemon. And so we read all the body corporate minutes. We read through multiple years of those kind of statements to make sure that what we were buying was all safe and sound. So we ended up with the second property in our portfolio, but still 100% in property all the way up to our mid-20s. And at around a couple of more years later, we had decided it's enough of us living in a one-bedroom apartment. We wanted to expand into something with a little bit more space, so we ended up at that time upgrading into a larger place to live in. And that takes up onto what our portfolio looked like past our mid-20s. During our early 30s, we were saving as much of our income as possible and living a very humble life, and we had managed to pay down most of our mortgage for the first two properties, and we'd also moved into a larger property for ourselves to live in. We were also at the time preparing for our eventual retirement, and we were consuming as much information about finance as possible. One of the books that really stood out to me was Money by Tony Robbins. You guys might remember Tony Robbins. He used to do the life coaching and also the infomercials back then on TV. Tony Robbins is also a fantastic investor, and he has a gift for simplifying complicated investment terms into things that everyday people like myself can understand. He's also interviewed some of the greatest investing minds in the world today. One of those is my personal hero, Ray Dalio, who founded Bridgewater, and he's written one of my favorite books on investing of all time, Big Debt Crisis. Going back to the book, Money Masters the Game from Tony Robbins. Specifically, there was a section by Ray Dalio and Tony Robbins himself about the all-weather portfolio, and that's just a beautiful piece of information. I'll leave it right over here. Basically, it's a distribution of your total wealth into four main asset classes, and the idea behind it is there are debt cycles throughout the world. In economics, where there's a long-term debt cycle, a mid-term debt cycle, or short-term debt cycle, and that's constantly changing throughout time. And so when you have an increase in price of bonds, you may have a decrease of price of stocks, and vice versa. You may have an increase in price of stocks and a decrease in price of bonds, but the way that the portfolio has set up is to maintain a relative balance to your overall wealth. And so Yen and myself, we actually constructed our portfolio in a very similar manner. For us right now, our portfolio, what it looks like is 30% in property, 30% in stocks, 35% in fixed term deposits and also bonds, and then 5% in commodities. And so the way that we've set this up is that whatever happens in one specific asset class that may affect the income, it should be balanced out by the other asset classes, at least to cover for the short term while things recover in the long term. So for example of that, right now, yields in apartments or property is quite low because of the pandemic that's happening around globally. But because it's low right now, there are other asset classes, mainly in the stocks and also in the fixed term deposits that we managed to fix a long time ago, that still maintain a higher percentage of return or yield for our net income. And so this pain in the property sector hasn't been as strongly impacted on our overall portfolio. If we had continued on keeping that portfolio which we had started with, which was 100% property, that pain would have been felt a lot more severely. As you can see, by diversifying away from the 100% property portfolio that Yen and I had during our early to mid-20s and heading more into the direction of the all-weather portfolio, we were able to minimize the amount of impact that the global pandemic had on our passive income, which is incredibly important because our passive income always needs to be at a certain threshold, otherwise it will start eating away at our equity. So two massive takeaways that I hope you guys can take away from this is that one is to gain as much knowledge about the assets that you're interested in as possible. For example, when Yen and I first started investing into stocks, I read as many financial statements as possible. I really wanted to gain a good understanding of the position that the company was in at a specific point in time, and in order to do that, I had to upskill myself to be able to read their balance sheets. Now at first, I have to admit, a lot of it went straight over my head, but dedication and hard work really paid off. And that actually leads me to point two, which is you really do have to be committed to the path that you've chosen and have that discipline, whether it's saving enough money to be able to invest, or whether it's buying low and selling high, diversifying your portfolio, or just gaining that knowledge for the assets that you want to purchase. It's all incredibly important and part of that discipline. Because there is the kind of investor who will just rely on other people to give them the information. But that, I guarantee you, is not a strategy that Yen and I want to follow. We want to be able to take control of our own money and take control of our own futures with our investments. So that brings us to the end of the video, guys. If you've enjoyed it, please do smash the like and subscribe button. And if you know a friend who's also trying to reach the path of retirement and they need some help with their portfolio, please share this video with them. We're going to return to food and travel videos as soon as we can, after the lockdown, of course, is lifted. But until then, we'll catch you all next time. Good luck with your retirement journey. If you guys have enjoyed watching this video, then you might want to check out this other video here too. This one is my 5 top tips for how to retire young. And this other one right here is how to figure out how much you're going to need to retire.